Welcome to Exhibition. And hello, Michelle Cawthorn.
Hello, Richard. How are you? Nice to see you.
I'm really well, thank you, and great to see you again. And your exhibition is Songbird at the Shoalhaven Regional Gallery in Nowra, New South Wales. And memory is always a really important element in your work. What's the connection here between memory and bird calls?
I'm interested in the way that bird call can connect you to memory and place over time. So, for instance, for me, one of my really early memories is the sound of the Australian raven, that really distinctive call that it has. As a small child, holidaying down in Lake Conjola, before we moved to Nowra, which we did in the 1980s. So for this exhibition, I have looked solely at the birds of the area that I've grown up in. So that's the Sydney region and also the region of the south coast of New South Wales around Nowra and the Shoalhaven.
And in this exhibition, there are elements of collage in a lot of the works, and there are also elements of ink drawing in many of them. How do you go about the process of combining those elements?
Yeah, so for this exhibition, because I was having difficulty sourcing the imagery that I needed, which was of the birds of the Sydney and South Coast region, I went to the State Library and went to the rare and special books collection and was looking at watercolours that were made by, in fact, colonial era artists. So that for this exhibition, I have solely used the works of the Sydney bird painter. So all of the birds that are either featuring in the ones you can sort of see here behind me, which are the larger digital collage and ink works on paper, and for this there's a series of smaller hand-cut collages. All of those ones, all of the images in there have been sourced from the Sydney bird painter.
You were talking about hand-cut images and collages, but you were also talking about, going to the rare books in the State Library. So what is the physical process of transitioning from you carefully opening a rare book to you cutting up an image and making a collage? What are you doing in between?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I photographed the works from the rare book of the Sydney bird painter. The Sydney bird painter is an unknown artist. No one knows who made those paintings, and so the artist is known as the Sydney bird painter. So the process, I photographed. I in fact photographed all of his works. It took me quite some time to do that. And then I worked with Holly Jones from High Res Digital, and because I have zero Photoshop skills, Holly and I sat down and what we did was each of my raw images, if you like, we worked to then cut them out digitally, and then I showed her the places I wanted the cuts to be for the big works. For the small works, we just printed those works out in as they were whole, and then that's the hand cutting process. I then went in and hand cut all of the birds, and I kind of think of it as like a process of cannibalization. I'm kind of cutting them all up and dissecting them, and then I've got bird tails and heads and wings and all sorts of things across my desk here in the studio, and I start to sort of piece them together a little bit like fuzzy felt as a kid. You kind of bring these disparate image sections together to create these bird hybrids. But the thing that's really important for me when I'm making the collages is, I call it Shell's plausibility factor. So I'm trying to make something that when you first see it, you think, oh, I recognize that bird, it could be real. But then on second glance, you go, oh, hang on, that head doesn't go with that body, or that tail or those tails, they're a conglomerate. I've got some of the collages have up to 11 different elements of different birds in them. And that itself is a really slow and very meticulous process.
how do you choose the birds, which are the original source material or that you decide to incorporate? And do you have a sense of the sort of collaged bird you're going to end up with, or do they literally evolve as you make them?
Yeah, they do evolve as I make them. Some of them happen quite quickly, and they seem to come together of their own will. And by that I mean the placement. And I've been making collages for 10 years now in my practice, so I've kind of got a feeling for that. And it's not a conscious; it's an intuitive feeling. And it's little tweaking. It's a slight shift in an angle of a tail might be that way, and then I'll move it that way, and it changes the direction or the dynamic of the bird. Some of them are quite static, whereas others kind of look like they're in flight. None of them have legs, just as a heads up. I removed the legs.
You're not keen.
It's not necessary. Sorry?
You're not keen on the legs.
I'm not keen on the legs. I actually really love the legs, but I don't know, for some reason they never seem to quite work. So I have a whole pile of legs that haven't been used. That's probably a work somewhere down the track.
It's a future project.
Yeah.
There are, in the exhibition, there seem to be broadly two series of birds, and the smaller collaged works are called a chorus line, and then the name, then a person, what appears to be a person's name.
Yes.
What's the significance of those names, and how did you choose them?
So the chorus line refers to the bird call and the chatter and song that I hear all day long. But giving them each a name, sort of personifying the birds, is a way of me addressing the personalities that I see through the birds that visit us. So, for instance, the magpie that you can see in the kookaburra behind me. I mean, these are ubiquitous. Most people have these to some degree. They would see them each day, but we have families that come and sort of visit us and raise their young, and then, you know, we'll raise another clutch and they come back. So we sort of they feel like family, or, you know, good friends. So I've given them names, and the names in fact refer to my patrilineal and matrilineal lines. So all of the names of the series of collages have the names of my grandparents, great-grandparents, and also my great aunts and uncles. So because they're all deceased now, it was a nice way of sort of weaving them back into, you know, my family through these birds that come and visit me every day. So that's the titling of that series. The titles of the works that you can see behind me, where you have the digital collage and the hand drawing with the ink work. Those ones have names like Kimberley and Camberwarra, which are in fact titles of the places that I either remember seeing those birds as a child, or that that I still see in those places now. So it's a combination of the two, and they can be a title of a locale like Camberwarra is. But for instance, the magpie behind me is called Kimberley, and that's the name of the street I lived on in Gymea Bay when I was a child.
Going back to those times of childhood, and again returning to this concept of memory, memory has been such an important part of your practice for a long time, and you completed a PhD focusing
Yes.
on aspects of memory. What is it about memory that drives and influences your practice so strongly?
I lost my mother to breast cancer 8 years ago, and in the time leading up to that, she had the disease for some time, and the work that was coming out of the studio space started to be linked to the time when I was a child, and I was her child, she was alive. Before she died, I was starting to grieve the loss of that sense of being her child, and then the memory of those childhood spaces. So the little hatched mark that I make, that you can see in the works behind me, that's become quite a recognisable aspect of my practice, that allows me to access memory. That repetitive hatched mark making is slow, it's very meditative. The focus of my PhD was on drawing as a practice and how that can allow me to access memory. And the method by which I do that is to make this repetitive hatched mark.
So the act of drawing is for you actually a prompter, almost a portal to memory access.
Yes, yes, it is, very much so. I discovered through the focus of the PhD, which was on two particular memory events, that they tend to dominate. As if you can recall your own events from childhood, certain things take a precedence or a dominance in your memory narrative. And I was trying to excavate around those memories. And the way to do that was to use that meditative mark, which allowed me to sit in the memory space. And what I discovered was the longer I made the mark, the more memory started to come in to that space. And I liken it to shining a torch on something on a dark night. You can kind of see what's immediately there, but if you spend time and your eye starts to adjust, you can start to make sense of other things around it.
One of the large works in this exhibition is called Interloper,
Yes.
and has sort of looping forms in those Indian ink drawn marks and coloured areas. Is that in a sense your memory taking shape? It's not a picture of the memory, but is it a little like discovering the forms of memory?
Yeah, so that work is titled Interloper because it's an expression, if you like, or a way of trying to describe the feeling of moving from Sydney at the age of 10 down to Nowra in that same year, and feeling like an outsider, not feeling like I belonged at that point. And the loops that you can see, the kind of big winding ones, they sort of reference both the anxiety of that turns and twists in your belly, but also the road from Sydney down to Nowra, going through the Kiama Bends. Back then, you had to go through Kiama in the 80s. All of the bypasses weren't there. So it was a long trip, and it was windy. And the trip from the Nowra to Bowral every day to go to school is through Kangaroo Valley, and anyone who's done those roads know how windy they are. So the big dark marks reference that, but the pink arcs that you can see in the work, they sort of are about linking those two spaces. They're like bridges and memories, and trying to link the experiences from Sydney to my experiences then in Nowra. And I'm the little bird that hangs upside down, all confused.
So in a way, with a work like that, and perhaps with other works in the past where you've referred to events in your memory, if somebody knew how to interpret them, as you've just interpreted that, they are almost like roadmaps of memory.
Yeah, I suppose they are. I think that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, they're sort of signs and symbols. It's not like Google Maps where you can see what's going on exactly there. There's a certain amount of symbolism that's imbued in the work.
As a viewer looks at the works and sees particular marks or particular colours, are they specifically symbolic to you?
Yes, they are. The pink that you see that often turns up in my work, I use that pink emblematically. So that is emblematic of my girlhood, identifying as a female, body human being, and it has its own personality. So for me, that pink is very symbolically used within my practice. And the forms have their own sense of symbolism. I don't want the viewer to know exactly what they're seeing when they come to the work. I want them to pause and go, what is she trying to convey? And I'll give a hint in a title. Sometimes they're more explicit, sometimes they're less so, as a way for the audience to stop and pause and go, what does the work mean? and I hover between that representational and non-representational in the practice, so that there's sort of a hook, if you like, there's some way in for the viewer, but not so much that I've given them everything all at once.
Well, you've certainly given any viewer a lot to immerse themselves in and enjoy in this exhibition. So, Michelle Cawthorn, thanks very much for sharing the exhibition with us.
Oh, thank you, Richard. It's been a real pleasure.